everyone, Miss GoElectric here, and today I'm in Detroit, Michigan for this next In Charge segment, and luckily I get to sit down with Grounded RVs founder and CEO Sam Shapiro. Thanks for having us here, and specifically we're sitting inside your G2, which is your flagship product, so thanks for having us, Sam.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
So Sam, this is a very interesting concept that you have come up with to start this company, but I gotta know, how did you even get to this point, and what is your background in specific that led you to here?
Yeah, I've had a bit of an unusual background in some ways. Was a filmmaker as sort of a kid and through high school and college, but also took an interest in computer science and business from a young age as well. Um, but yeah, before this, I was at Starlink as an engineer. Actually, let me take a step back from that. I worked in advertising in New York City for 6 years, first on the creative side and then on the tech side. And um, the timing with COVID was just really interesting. I was living in Manhattan in a tiny, actually, my last apartment was a 150 square foot studio. It was the first time I lived by myself in Manhattan without a roommate. And it was an incredible location, but just tiny, tiny space. And um, the joke sort of was, because COVID happened, I moved out and I ended up building a camper van and living in that van for about 6 months. And the joke was always, people would tell me when I was living in that studio that you'll never be, this would be the smallest place you ever live. And I was basically like, hold my beer, I'm gonna move into a camper van. Um, but yeah, so had this total transformation in a way, or at least like radical shift in lifestyle from a tiny Manhattan apartment to living in a camper van, and then lived in nature and worked remotely. Still in ad tech, still kept that job, and sort of did the remote van thing for a few months. And internet was one of the biggest challenges actually during that experience. And, just because I was working full time, but going to national parks and campgrounds, sometimes even with the sort of cellular antenna that I had set up, internet could be a little bit spotty. And so then I joke that, I wanted a Starlink at the time, but it was still early. This was 2020, 2021. And so the only way to get one was to go work at SpaceX. And so that's what I did. And I went to Starlink. So that trip went all over the country in the van, up the East Coast, up to the High Peaks Wilderness, through the Midwest, down to Texas, Big Bend National Park, through the Southwest, White Sands, Sequoia, all the way to Southern California and up California, and then ending in the Pacific Northwest, which is where the Starlink program is based.
Wow.
And so did that. And then actually, this might be too much information, but I still had my camper van. I moved into an apartment in Seattle when I started at SpaceX. And so then I started renting out the camper van on the weekends to people, just because Seattle has this huge outdoor community. And then actually that was sort of really successful as this sort of hobby side business. So then I bought a converted ambulance, and I was renting out my original camper van and a converted ambulance outside of my apartment building in Seattle. And then when I eventually left SpaceX to start Grounded, or really to start conceptualizing, I knew I wanted to start a business. I knew I was passionate about camper vans and the outdoors and electrification, but spent a little bit of time like sort of researching and thinking about the business I wanted to start and looking for, people to start the business with, and actually moved back into the ambulance and did sort of like skiing and Zion for a month and some of that. So that was sort of the path. It's a weird roundabout path, but with some serendipity, but that's sort of how I got to Grounded. And I'll mention that the camper van that I originally built was a gas-powered Chevy Express 2500, and I was doing maintenance all the time. The engine broke down once. You're at campgrounds and you're blowing exhaust, running the engine just to power the electronics, which is sort of this like weird contradiction where you're trying to embrace nature, but you're also, blowing exhaust and carbon dioxide into the space. And so
And noise.
and noise
Yeah.
too. Yeah, noise is another thing, even if you have a generator. So I kept thinking that, the product could be way better if it was electric, and it's quiet and there's no maintenance and you have this giant battery that you can pull power from. And so really started Grounded with the thesis of, let's build an electric camper van. It's going to be this amazing product. And then, we developed this sort of modular system to go with that, for customization, and the electronics piece to have a really high tech product where people can control everything from the app. But that's how it started.
So it's probably a lot to learn when you're in that phase of having your own camper van, and so this kind of modular system seemed maybe obvious to you that there were optimizations that you could make in your own use case of your van itself to make it even better when you even get to an electric platform too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the DIY camper build community is in and of itself evidence that, because there's this robust DIY, right? I mean, there's no
Oh my gosh.
shortage of YouTube videos of
Yeah.
people building, which I myself consumed hundreds of hours of when I was building my camper van. And I think that that is evidence that it's basically of an unmet need, right, from the big RV companies. Where, because if you go buy a camper van from one of the big RV companies, you're basically choosing like one floor plan. Maybe they have two floor plans you're choosing from, but it's basically that set configuration. And I think what the DIY community shows, and both DIY in terms of upfit, and then also even people who are buying RVs from the manufacturers and then doing tons of aftermarket modifications to those vehicles, what it shows is that people really want to customize their campers. And so that was very obvious to me. And the modular customization that we introduced with Grounded was sort of my solution to, let's how do we do manufacturing at scale, because we want to have an impact and build a big business, but also have the level of customization that you currently can only find from the DIY community or these more like custom craftsman shops, right? And so we're trying to be sort of in the middle there of the best of both worlds. And so that's where this idea of Lego-like modular customization comes in.
And forgive me if I'm wrong on this, but when you were at the ad agency and when you were at Starlink, you were doing software stuff. Is that correct?
So my first job after school was actually on the creative side of advertising, where we were making TV commercials, branding campaigns,
Harken to your film experience.
Exactly, yeah. So have always been a pretty creative person and like wanted to exercise that muscle. But yeah, then I moved over to ad tech, where I was building software products for the advertising space. So that was tech and software. And then Starlink, I was writing software for the satellites and Wi-Fi routers.
So, what I think is a huge missing opportunity in this space that you've taken advantage of is the software component and bringing all of those elements together to have an app that shows you exactly the utilization of all the systems that you have in here. So, can you speak to a little bit on that and how your experience had translated to create something of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the supply chain for the RV industry is pretty interesting. A lot of it's based out of Elkhart, Indiana, obviously. And you have these big suppliers, and there are a few different ones for different types of appliances and electronics that go inside these RVs. But really, really, like fundamentally, what these RV companies are doing is they're taking this hodgepodge of different components and they're sort of slapping them together. And there's not a lot of integration that happens by these big RV companies. And so when you walk into one of these traditional RVs, it sort of looks like the Apollo spacecraft inside, where you have like 8 different control panels, that each one controls something different, because each appliance might have its own supplier and its own control system. And so, and the interchangeability is important too for those companies. um, as for any manufacturer, because if there's a supply chain issue and now we need to swap it out, so it makes sense why they do it that way, because it's easier to swap it out with a different supplier if you need to, but it makes for a worse consumer experience. And so it's confusing. There's all these different systems to learn, different panels and failure points. And so we wanted to create sort of a seamless single user experience. And so we have the Grounded app, and from the Grounded app, you can control all the different appliances inside the van. You can see power consumption in real time, so exactly how much energy the heat pump is using, or the water heater is using, or that your laptop is pulling from the outlet that you're plugged into. You can turn each of those circuits on and off from the app, from anywhere in the world. So you could be finishing your hike and turn the hot water heater on so that your warm shower is ready when you get there. You can see how much solar power is coming in. You can see the battery state of charge. And then we're working on a software integration with GM so that you'll be able to see the vehicle range and vehicle DTC codes as well.
Very cool. Now, when you first started this, obviously we're sitting in the bright drop right now, but you got this company started. And so a couple things I want to ask you is you chose certain platforms to start off with, and I believe the e-transit was the first one. So can you talk about like integrating into your first product and how you got to this point?
Yeah, so I started the company in almost exactly 2 years ago in the fall of 2022. And at the time, the Ford E-Transit was really the only electric cargo van on the market. The Bright Drop wasn't. I mean, it was certainly out there being tested, but wasn't really available for sale. So my philosophy with building the business is let's ship product to customers, right? Let's not spend years in R&D mode. So it was really like, all right, let's get a Ford E-Transit and let's build something on it. And we had an early customer in California who actually leased 3 of them from us and rented them out to customers out there. The big limitation was the range, though. It was only about 110 miles of range on the high roof Ford E-Transits. So, certainly we got a lot of criticism for like, why would you build an RV product with 110 miles of range? But again, the philosophy was like, let's make something, let's get something out there, let's start testing, let's see what this experience is like. Is it going to be a mainstream product with 100 miles of range? No, but that's fine. There's someone out there, who will use it. And in this use case in the Bay Area, with people doing shorter trips, it worked for a time. So we did 3 what I would call prototypes on the E-Transit that were, being rented in the Bay Area. But that's all we ever built on the E-Transit. And then pretty quickly after that, we were able to get our hands on our first Bright Drop, and that was a total game changer, largely because of the range, right? So 270 miles of EPA rated range. We get over 300 miles if you don't go over 60, 65 miles an hour. And so right now we're pretty exclusively building on the GM Bright Drop platform. Eventually we will be platform agnostic, where we will, a customer will be able to go to our website and kind of build their van and choose which platform they want to be their base, whether it's the E-Transit, the Bright Drop, the Mercedes E-Sprinter, the Rivian van, maybe even some non-van platforms in the future that we're kind of looking at right now. And then choose your platform and then choose your upfit, right? So choose which modules you want, where you want them to go.
And that was one thing that I wanted to ask you is that obviously you see this is your immediate need that you're filling as the camper van style, but is Grounded going to go into the realm of where other people are at with travel trailers or, other class RVs that you can see your platform working in?
I think if you think about like what is Grounded's technology and like what is Grounded's real product, we're not building the vehicle powertrain, right? So if you look at there's some of these companies now, startups that are doing electric trailer RVs, right? They're building these full integrated powertrain trailers, right? So they're actually developing the whole high voltage powertrain system. That's great. That's not what we're doing. We're taking a different approach where we're building on top of powertrain platforms provided by the OEMs. The real Grounded technology and Grounded product is in this sort of modular interior upfit system. So all the materials that go with that, the design that powers the modularity, which lets customers customize it, change it over time, easy maintenance and serviceability because components can just be swapped out super easily. And then the technology, so the embedded systems that we put inside, the software that we write, the mobile app that lets you remotely monitor and control everything in the vehicle from anywhere in the world. And so, from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense why we are now expanding beyond RVs to mobile medicine, mobile dental, mobile pet grooming, mobile offices, mobile food trucks, refrigerated food transport, because it all is sort of the same idea of, and especially because we get to focus on this interior upfit system, and we don't have to worry about the powertrain. We basically extend that system to all these other things. So that's really what the product is. And yeah, you can imagine a world where thinking about how that could evolve over time, there's a lot of directions that I think the business could go in. So it could be trivial for us to eventually do trailers where even electric trailers where we still would not build an electric powertrain. But if there were a provider that were to sell us an electrified trailer platform, and then we could sort of build just the box on top with the interior system, and then it still has the grounded system, it has the grounded modules, it has the grounded software, but we're still not building the powertrain. I think that would fit within this sort of like business model that we're building, right? Or things like maybe we get a cab chassis in the future instead of a full van, right? And we build that whole box on the back. Or maybe we get a skateboard platform where it's like just the chassis skateboard and we're building that whole box on top. Or maybe there's even, this is kind of crazy, but like what if there was an electric bike platform and we're building like a trailer type of thing on the back of a electric cargo bike, whether it's for EMTs at festivals or for delivery drivers in the city or for RVers who want to be going around campgrounds or sort of like limited public lands, and be able to bike and then sleep in the back.
That's pretty cool because we just did a segment with over at New Lab, which I know you guys are a part of as well, which we'll get into in a moment. But with Civilized Cycle, and they're doing a semi-trike, so I could see there definitely some cool applications there where you have something going on the back of one of those.
There could be some cool partnership opportunities there. For
Absolutely.
Sure.
So that's really cool. Now, what about something like a Tesla Semi, that big of a concept of an electric platform? Is that too big?
I remember seeing like years ago at this point when they first, I don't even think the Semi was actually out yet, but like literally there's some like law of the universe of like when a vehicle platform comes out, like somebody on the internet will make RV renders of it.
Yes.
And so like as soon as the Semi, even renders from Tesla came out, somebody was like on it, and it was like, here's the Tesla Semi RV and exactly what it would look like, and it looks super cool. But it'd be a little hard to maneuver that around campgrounds and RV parks just because of how big it is. But
Speaking of New Lab, what was your path to get to Detroit?
yeah, so I'm not from here. I actually had literally never been in the state of Michigan before I started Grounded 2 years ago, which was my miss. But I'm from Atlanta and lived in New York, lived in Seattle for SpaceX, lived in a van. And I was thinking about where to start the company because, like I said, I went back to living in an ambulance after SpaceX and was conceptualizing the business idea. Met my co-founders. We had sort of the initial product roadmap, and then it was time to build the first prototype. And we were choosing, okay, we need physical space to do this. Where are we going to do it? And I actually, the New Lab and Michigan Central folks love to tell this story. I was down in Austin because I thought Austin could be a good place to do it. Tesla's there, SpaceX is there. There's some manufacturing. It's a good place to live. And I was literally looking at warehouse spaces in Austin. I had a commercial lease agreement for 3 years in my hand. And the same week, I got introduced to the New Lab folks who are, at the time, were just getting started this incubator here in Detroit. And they were like, you have to come check out, what we're building here. And so Grounded ended up being the first member company of this New Lab Michigan Central sort of incubator here in Detroit. And they have manufacturing resources, they have office space, they have kind of workshop space. And so it was a really amazing place for an early stage startup to build a hardware company because, some of the most expensive high risk things are buying equipment, signing a commercial lease agreement, right? And so it just took a ton of the risk off the table and provided us with lots of resources early on. And so the same week that I had that first conversation with the New Lab folks, I told my team, I was like, we're going to build this company in Detroit.
And to that note, is there any incentives that kind of pushed you even further to decide to come here? Because I know a lot of companies, especially in the e-mobility space, are coming to this area because they're incentivized by the local government.
That didn't play a role in us choosing to come to Detroit at all. It really was more, the sort of New Lab space and the equipment and the resources that come with that, and the broader manufacturing ecosystem in Detroit. So knowing that there were all these CNC shops and composite suppliers and things like that. That being said, we were fortunate to receive some government grants from the state of Michigan. So I would give like huge kudos to the state around their forwardness in supporting the innovation ecosystem in the state of Michigan. especially from a mobility perspective, but not exclusively from a mobility perspective. And they actually launched an outdoor fund too, to specifically support outdoor recreation businesses. And so we were a recipient of some of that money as well.
And also, you're in the backyard of the automakers, quite a few of them. So that was probably also helpful in your decision making if you wanted to build on a platform that was already existing from them. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true for sure. And Ford is actually the major corporate sponsor of New Lab and the Michigan Central project here. It's all sort of Bill Ford was like the leader of the project. And so we've had a lot of opportunities to connect with the folks at Ford and then GM as well. I mean, even though GM's not part of the incubator, we're obviously building on a GM platform, not a Ford platform right now. And we have a great relationship with GM. They're all close by. Like I said, they've come and done facility tours of the grounded space, and we're pretty involved with it. And actually, we're going to be at the Detroit Auto Show in January as part of the GM booth,
Oh, cool.
showing off a braid drop grounded upfit.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah.
We're at a different facility other than New Lab. So can you talk about this particular spot where
So we're only a few blocks away from Michigan Central and New Lab, which is the historic train station. We're here in Southwest, but it's only about 5 blocks, and this is our 13,000 square foot facility. So this is where we do all of our assembly and fabrication. We do still use some of the machines at New Lab. So what we'll do is we'll basically bring the material over there, process it on the machines, and then bring the processed material back to our facility. And then this is where we do all the assembly.
and so what is your plan for assembly here? Because the 13,000 square foot building, so you'll be able to hopefully scale up a little bit more.
I think there's a couple interesting things here. One is that I think we could pretty comfortably build, let's say, just in terms of the physical footprint, we could probably have around 10 vehicles, in production at the same time. And and then it becomes a question of how fast is the turnaround, right? So if we're getting to a place where we can turn around, you know, it takes a week to completely turn over a vehicle, then and we can do 10 at the same time, right? Then that's several hundred vehicles a year that we'd be able to produce in this facility. So from that perspective, I don't think, I mean, we will outgrow that at some point, probably not next year. And the other interesting thing that I mentioned before with the modular system and the kind of construction approach here, where we build this whole structure on the warehouse floor, it gets insulation, it gets electrical wiring, it gets plumbing, it gets the wall panels put in, and we do all that, and then we take this almost manufactured home structure and we put it in the van. And so what that also means is that we don't even need to be able to bring 10 vans into our facility to do 10 vans at the same time, because most of the work can happen sort of self-contained on the structure. And then it's like bring the van in, spend one day, putting the structure in and integrating it, and then get the van out, right? So that also helps from like a turnover business model perspective.
So at this time, how many employees do you have working under your company? And do you see that there is an immediate need for any kind of expansion? And what kind of people are you looking for?
Yeah, so we're 13 people today, literally on Monday, but this will have happened,
Yeah.
I would think, by the time you release this video. Um, we're going to announce that I actually just recruited another SpaceX colleague who was a manufacturing leader at SpaceX, and then more recently has been a manufacturing leader at the Amazon Kuiper satellite program, which competes with Starlink. So he's actually moving from Seattle to Detroit to help us scale up. So he's sort of our next big hire, and then we're definitely going to be hiring more in 2025. We're going to be looking to build out the team of technicians who physically build the vans. We're going to be looking to hire more engineers, mechanical engineers, software engineers. And then I am also looking for head of fleet sales on those more commercial business sectors. So yeah, if any of those are interesting to people, definitely reach out to us.
Now, as far as that goes, you're speaking of technicians and stuff, and obviously there's things that can be fixed here, but I think that's one of the benefits of you getting a platform from the OEMs is that the warranty and things that are involved with the vehicle systems are easily fixed because there's dealers everywhere and stuff like that. So are there any other elements that, make it beneficial to go with an OEM in that regard of kind of having that repairability on the OEM
I think
side?
that's such a big one. There's a lot of engineering founders at New Lab at the incubator, and I think something that I've noticed is that there is this engineer founder tendency to want to build everything from the ground up. And it makes sense because as an engineer, you're like, oh, we could do this better, we could do this better, right? And you want more control. Um, but I think that in some ways you almost have to fight that as an entrepreneur because from the perspective of there are advantages to sort of using things that are out there, right, and focusing on the part that makes you special and different. And so yeah, I think what you're mentioning is a big one where if we were developing the powertrain ourselves, then it opens up a whole can of worms, right, of like how are people going to get this serviced, and do technicians around the country have experience with these specific components, or do they need to, is there a learning curve with the design, right? And so the way we think about warranty is we basically divide it between the sort of vehicle warranty from GM and then the grounded interior system. So if it's anything with the vehicle, the high voltage battery, the motor, the steering, you take it to a GM service center. And actually, BrightDrop in 2025 is going to become the Chevrolet BrightDrop. So you'll be able to get it serviced at any GM service center in the country, basically. And then if it's anything with the grounded upfit, then we handle it. And again, there's a lot we can do with software. There's also if something's broken or damaged and we need to ship a replacement component, it's like, okay, remove a few bolts, take the piece out, and put the new piece in. So even on the electronics and plumbing side, it's super easy to make changes. And then we also are building a remote technician network. And so in some cases already, we've coordinated sending out remote technicians to wherever our customers are to do any repair work necessary.
So, are there going to be specific hubs that you see are most important there? Because you are selling this pretty much everywhere. So, I got to imagine you see that there's some concentration in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are some areas in the country where there's really high demand for camper vans in general. I think the Northwest, I mean, really the whole West Coast is such a big one. So, yeah, we want to have more of a presence out there. We're going to be doing more shows and festivals on the West Coast in 2025, so that we can get, more face-to-face time with the customers out there.
Can you talk a little bit about your funding? Because a project like this seems like it would be expensive to start. So, can you speak to how to get an operation like this going with the funding?
I mean, if you're building powertrains, right? I mean, then it's like building a vehicle program. Vehicle programs are notoriously billion-dollar programs to get off the ground and scaled up. So we do have the advantage, huge advantage, that should not be understated, that we are not building vehicle powertrains. We're not building the vehicles from scratch. So that's supremely helpful. And then the manufacturing approach and design that we've implemented is one where we don't currently use much um, tooling investment. So, usually like with high volume manufacturing, you're going to have different, molds and tooling that you really need to invest pretty significant amounts of money up front. And the economics there only really work out at scale. And, again, with the whole sort of philosophy of how we've built this business is one where we wanted to start lower volume. We wanted to get products out there in the market, in customers' hands. We wanted to get customer feedback, keep making the product better. And so we've implemented a design and manufacturing approach where, we intentionally didn't take that kind of expensive tooling route and instead use sort of like more 2D manufacturing approaches where we can iterate really, really quickly without significant upfront cost. And so um, all that is to say that we've been on a unit per unit basis, positive gross margin, since unit number one, right? And, not to say that the business is, hugely profitable today, because we have operational costs and overhead and the facility and the employees and things like that. But I think we'll get there. I think we are not, um, I'm not trying to build a traditional VC type of business where, for better or for worse, what you see with the traditional venture model is, fundraising round after fundraising round after fundraising round. Um, and a lot of times to the extent where, these companies won't survive if they can't raise that next round of funding. And I'm trying to not follow that paradigm. We are planning to get the company to profitability so that it can really stand on its own. Hopefully in the next, year and a half
So,
to 2 years.
how many have you sold so far?
We've sold almost 15 now, and we have a strong sales pipeline. Again, both on the RV, consumer RV product side, and also on the commercial fleet side of things. And in fact, there's actually some fleet customers we're talking to who might place bigger orders, which will be meaningful for us from a scale and volume perspective. If a fleet customer wants to buy a dozen dental vans, then all of a sudden that's also a lot of vans to build at the same time.
So what do you see your turnaround rate for something like if someone was saying, I want to buy, 12 of your vans fitted out in my specific custom way, how quickly is someone going to be able to get delivery on finished vehicles?
Well, today for an RV customer, for a single van, we're quoting about 60, 60 to 90 days. And again, that's based on sort of the current order pipeline. But scale is going to be a big focus for 2025 for us, right? So we just made that hire that I mentioned who's going to be leading manufacturing. And we're going to be, we raised this fundraising round. So we're going to be investing into sort of this transition from what for the last year has looked a little bit more like a shop, right? Where we're, it's like one van at a time and a lot of customizations, new modules that we're developing for new customers. We're going to be sort of shifting to let's make this look a little bit more like an assembly line, repeatable manufacturing processes. And so we're going to be significantly reducing the time to build each van. And so, like I said, we want to be able to support larger orders like that in 2025.
And when we're talking about like competitively, where do you think you stand as far as making this product in comparison to, what's already on the market and maybe someone doing like a conversion project? Like I've seen a couple, like Winnebago was going to come out with some kind of electric platform, but how do you stand against the competition?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Winnebago one also had 110 miles of
Mhm.
range. But you know, range aside, because really that just comes down to the platform choice. And so these big RV companies can eventually expand to the BrightDrop platform if they want to, or the Rivian platform, or whatever platform. So I think the terminal state is that all the RV companies will be on all the platforms, including Grounded. And because we're not developing the powertrain isn't going to be a long-term differentiator for us. It only is right now because we're sort of the first mover. But again, I think the real secret sauce for Grounded and like what the actual product is it's this modular interior system that allows customers to customize the interior space to a much, much higher extent than they can do from any of the other RV manufacturers. And also the technology that we put inside and the mobile experience and the integrated, electronics and the ability to monitor and control everything in the vehicle from anywhere in the world.
Now, speaking of that mobile capability, do you see yourselves ever? I know you had touched on this a little bit. Is it rental platforms? Is it people do maybe not want to buy these, but would you leave that up to your fleet customers, or would you get into that kind of space?
It's funny. We've experimented with rentals, and we've done them. There was the fleet customer where the fleet customer rented them out, but in that initial arrangement, we actually were leasing the vans to the fleet customer. And then we've also done short-term rentals. We did a partnership with RV Share where we had a couple of the vans for rent. And Michigan Central was generous enough to put a EV charger level 2 out front of the book depository for charging in between renters. That being said, a rental business is a whole nother business and a very different business than a product design and manufacturing company. And so I sort of found that it's a little bit too much to try to take on as a very early stage startup to do both. And so we really want to focus and be very good at one thing, which is the product design and manufacturing of, grounded vans. And so That's what we're focused on right now. In the long term, do we explore the rental business again in the future? Maybe, maybe. And I think there's also some interesting other models where, most RV owners in America use their RVs, 10 days a year, something like that. So I think there's also an opportunity to have some sort of a rental program with existing Grounded customers where, somebody could go onto the Grounded app, get connected with a G2 owner close to them and sort of request a rental. So we have a lot of ideas, just like any startup, and it's really about choosing the ones that you have time and resources to go after and prioritizing those.
So with your design and your modularity being one of your differentiators, do you have any kind of IP, any kind of patents that are associated with that design?
Yeah. So I'll say two things about this. One is that we do have a patent filed for our whole modular design system that allows us to do the customization that we've been talking about, and also the electronics modularity that's part of that, right? Because the electronics have to be as modular as the physical construction. Because if somebody opts for this electrical appliance or that electrical appliance or changes the position of the outlets, that all needs to translate to the digital layer of the app, and so they sort of go hand in hand. And so the patent kind of covers the sort of like mechanical modularity design and the electrical modularity design. But the second thing I'll say is that I do also kind of agree with Elon's philosophy on patents, which is that, like, you know, patents, they, they have a place, but, I mean, first of all, for an early stage startup, it's just not really realistic that we would ever get into some legal battle with someone. I mean, we don't have the resources to do that. But the other bigger thing is it's also, I do think that if you sort of move fast enough and iterate fast enough, patents become irrelevant, right? And so that actually becomes the long-term defensibility and uniqueness, and sort of like why you're better as a company, which I think SpaceX and Tesla do really, really well. And so that's an ethos that we're trying to bring to Grounded, where we're just constantly iterating, constantly coming up with new features, implementing those, trying to apply to some extent the speed of software iteration to a hardware business. And I think we've been reasonably successful at that so far. And I think looking to 2025, as we bring on more engineers and have more resources behind us, I'm going to look to push that even harder. And so, fast iteration, fast product cycle improvements, taking customer feedback, making it better and better and better.
And speaking of customer feedback, is there like one overarching thing that you are like really wanting to see in some of these platforms that you're working with that the products you don't have at this moment, but that you would like your customers to have or that your customers have brought up to you?
The biggest thing is tighter integration between the interior electrical system and the high voltage battery of the vehicle. So in an ideal world, the solar is directly charging the high voltage battery. All the interior appliances are directly pulling from the high voltage battery. In an ideal world, there wouldn't be two batteries, right? It doesn't really, from a first principles perspective, make sense. We have limitations, which is why we do have a house battery, because again, we're limited by the OEM's platform of how much power we can pull from the high voltage battery.
And you don't want to void any warranties or anything like that.
We don't want to avoid warranties, right? I mean, we could go in and we could splice wires, but something happens, it opens up. So, we're not going to do that unless we have GM's sort of buy-in to that. But that would be the biggest thing. Like if it, and I think we can get there. I think we will get there. Like I said, we've met with the product teams at these OEMs. They get this feedback from many upfitters, right? And so I think that's the biggest miss right now in this sort of space, is that we have this giant battery here and we can't use it to its full potential just yet. And I think the product still works great. We still have the house battery that powers everything. And so it's a pretty seamless experience for the user. But a couple little things like being able to just directly charge the vehicle battery from the solar, could go a long way.
We're probably going to have some viewers that, one, maybe interested in the product, or two, want to be involved somehow with Grounded RVs. So how can those people get that done?
Yeah. Go to our website, follow us on Instagram, go to our website, groundedrvs.com, email us, info@groundedrvs.com. I think we also have a separate jobs email address that's on the website somewhere. And then also my face will pop up on the website as a chat bot, and you can message me directly. So, all those ways will come through to us. And yeah, would love to chat with the audience more and hear your feedback and talk to you about your customized G2 if you want one. And if you're interested in a job at Grounded, we'll be posting a lot more roles in the next 6 months.
Well, thank you for spending some time with us, Sam. This has been a real treat, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to take a look. Maybe one day we'll be able to take it out for a camping trip. That would be nice, but I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you all so much for watching this latest video, and if you want to learn more, I'll put some links down in the description below. But until next time, drive, fly, ride. Go electric.